For us, the big story at ASCO is not really one abstract in isolation. It's whether the meeting gives us more evidence that bispecifics are becoming a major modality in solid tumors, and not just an important modality in hematology.
We're now a few weeks out from ASCO 2026, and while the full data hasn't dropped yet, the abstract titles are already hinting at where the field is headed. Now's the time for clinical leaders to look for the signals that will eventually become the new standard of care. Today we're joined by Ben Murray, who's part of the medical strategy team at BGB Group, an agency known for its ability to fuse medical strategy and clinical data. Ben is here to help us look past the headlines and analyze the latest developments in bispecifics, ADCs, and the shift towards an earlier stage interventions. I'm Bella Chakowski, reporter for MM+M, and this is the MM+M podcast in partnership with BGB Group. Ben, thanks so much for joining today. Just to set the table a bit, can you tell me a little bit about what you do at BGB Group?
Hi, Bella. Of course. I'm on the medical team here at BGB Group. I am a PhD by training in the field of chemistry. And since I began working in medical communications and medical advertising, I have worked on several oncology runs. And I'm thrilled to be here today with you to discuss the upcoming ASCO meeting in Chicago.
Perfect. Yeah. So we are just a little ways off. I understand the meeting's kicking off at the end of the month. And at this point, we're still working off of abstract titles for the most part, meaning we don't really have, full data sets. But based on what's been released so far, what are the major themes you're most excited for at ASCO 2026?
At BGB Group, we think there are a few clear themes already starting to emerge, even from the abstract titles alone. First, I would say bispecifics continue to stand out, especially as the class expands further into solid tumors. That's an important aspect because we already know how effective these classes can be in hematologic malignancies. So the question now is, how much of that success can be replicated into solid tumors, and specifically, which disease states? Second, ADCs have really been one of the most defining modality stories at recent ASCOs, particularly across HER2 and TROP2. And I think that momentum absolutely continues. However, that said, this year might feel a little bit different, at least based on what we can see right now. It looks more like a year of continued expansion and refinement rather than a year dominated by major practice-changing ADC data readouts. Another theme is the movement of some highly active therapies into earlier stage and perioperative settings. That has been building over several meetings now, but it continues to gain importance because it reflects a broader shift in the oncology space. We're trying to intervene earlier and with a curative intent to achieve better long-term outcomes rather than just controlling advanced disease. And then there's also continued progress in historically difficult to treat tumors. That includes areas like pancreatic cancer, sarcomas, small cell lung cancer, and other rare diseases where even incremental advances can be highly meaningful due to the unmet need in those areas. So while we're still early and working from limited information, the story appears to be that emerging modalities are advancing, established ones are broadening, and the oncology space as a whole is becoming more precise in how it matches treatments to timing, setting, and patient populations.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to dig into there and preview ahead of the meeting. But let's start off with bispecifics, which you mentioned sort of at the top of that answer. It's a class that's already proven to be highly effective across multiple hematologic malignancies. As the class moves more into solid tumors, what are you most excited to watch at ASCO this year?
What makes bispecifics so interesting right now is that it's no longer a hypothetical modality. In hematologic malignancies, particularly with T-cell engagers, these agents have already proven that they can have meaningful clinical benefit across multiple indications. So the conversation this year is more about how far can that success extend in solid tumors, where the biology is often significantly more challenging. One of the clearest examples to watch is Imdelltra in extensive stage small cell lung cancer. DLL3 has emerged as a very compelling target in SCLC, and Imdelltra has really proven that T-cell engager biology can have real activity in the solid tumor setting. The next layer of that question is what that activity looks like over time. People will definitely be watching durability very closely, and they'll be watching for any additional insights into intracranial activity. They'll also be paying close attention to how that safety profile continues to evolve, especially around CRS management. And this is because we are hoping to see more promising long-term results for diseases like SCLC, where the treatment options have historically been very limited. The other major bispecific story is ivonescimab in Harmony-6 for first-line squamous in SCLC. Ivonescimab is PD-1 VEGF bispecific, and this readout matters because it's getting at one of the biggest questions in the field right now. Can a dual mechanism bispecific outperform conventional PD-L1 based standards in solid tumors? We already saw promising PFS data from Harmony-6 last year, so the OS readout now becomes especially important to see if that benefit carries through to survival. And although this is a China-only study and will need global validation, I'm sure that some people are still going to see this as like the real proof of concept moment for the broader class. And additionally, that broader class is clearly gaining momentum across the board. PD-L1 VEGF bispecifics are now one of the most closely watched areas in oncology drug development. Like with additional targets like pumitamig and Pfizer and Merck's investigational PD-1 VEGF bispecifics, they're helping show how much investment is already moving into this space. The same is broadly true for next generation checkpoint bispecifics, including emerging combinations like PD-1, CTLA-4, and PD-1 TIGIT. The underlying idea there being that engineered co-targeting might allow you to capture the benefits of combination biology in a more integrated way, rather than just simply combining separate agents. So for us, the big story at ASCO is not really one abstract in isolation. It's whether the meeting gives us more evidence that bispecifics are becoming a major modality in solid tumors, and not just an important modality in hematology.
So bispecifics are definitely one major area for folks to watch this year. Another modality brought up that has dominated recent ASCO meetings are ADCs. Can you define that for us and how you're thinking about that class heading into ASCO?
Sure, antibody-drug conjugates remain one of the defining stories in modern oncology. And over the last several ASCO meetings, they have probably been among the most visible modality trends in the field. We've seen major momentum across HER2, TROP2, and like a bunch of other targets for the class, and it's moved well beyond a niche technology at this point. ADCs are now established as one of the core platforms reshaping how oncology drug development works. What makes this year a little different is that, at least from the abstract titles, ASCO 2026 does not look like it's going to be driven by a single major practice-changing ADC readout in the same way that some of the previous meetings have been. That doesn't mean that the class is cooling off, though. If anything, it reflects the fact that ADCs are moving into a more mature phase. We're no longer just wanting to know if the class works. That's already been established. We want to know how to optimize and expand it now. And you can see that clearly with the established agents like Enhertu and Datroway. These drugs continue to anchor the ADC conversation. They're increasingly being explored across more tumor types and into earlier lines of therapy. That is a sign of how foundational some of these assets are becoming. They're no longer just interesting mechanisms. And many settings are starting to look like backbone therapies within broader treatment strategies. At the same time, the next wave of ADC development is very much underway. There is continued interest in bispecific ADCs and in novel targets like B7H3, B7H4, PD-L1, as well as DLL3. These programs are generating early signals, and that's important because it tells us where the field might be heading next. But based on what we know today, those are mostly early building stories rather than the kind of readouts that are going to immediately reshape practice. So overall, we would describe ASCO 2026 as a consolidation year for ADCs. Class remains extremely important, but the focus is shifting from headline validation towards refinement, better targets, better payloads, better patient selection, and smarter use across disease settings.
Well, like I said, that seems like a lot of ground to cover, but also like it's going to be an exciting meeting. If we could move beyond specific modalities for a second, Ben, one of the biggest shifts we've seen in oncology is therapies moving into earlier stage and perioperative settings. What are you watching in that space as far as ASCO is concerned?
Yeah, we at BGB see this as one of the most important shifts in oncology right now. For years, many of the most active therapies were first developed and improved in metastatic disease, which made sense because that is where the need is urgent and where the drug activity can often be demonstrated first. But increasingly, the field is asking a different question. If a therapy is highly active in advanced disease, can it deliver even more impact when used earlier, particularly in settings where the goal is cure or long-term remission rather than just disease control? That is why we keep seeing more neoadjuvant, adjuvant, and perioperative settings. This is not just about using more treatment earlier. It's about trying to improve long-term outcomes in a more strategic way, ideally before MRD has the opportunity to drive recurrence. Proteus is one trial that's an important example of that. This is a phase 3 study. It's evaluating perioperative Erleada in high-risk localized prostate cancer. And this reflects a broader move towards intensifying treatment earlier when the risk of recurrence remains high. Also, the Libretto 432 trial is also expected to have an important readout. This is another phase 3 trial of adjuvant Retevmo in resected RET fusion positive NSCLC. And it also reflects how precision oncology is moving earlier into the disease course for these diseases. Retevmo has already established itself in advanced RET-altered lung cancer. So now we want to know if that benefit can be extended into earlier stage, biomarker-defined disease like post-surgery. The other key part of this conversation is that earlier stage treatment is becoming more precise. We're hearing more and more about pathologic CR, ctDNA, and as well as MRD as not simply as endpoints, but as tools that will help guide treatment intensity for patients. That is important because the future of perioperative therapy is probably not just about intensifying treatment for everyone. It's about individualization, figuring out who really needs the escalation and who can be spared that additional intensive therapy. So the overall story here is about using therapies earlier and in a smarter way.
Ben, another theme you mentioned at the top of our conversation is progress in historically difficult to treat tumors. What's sort of standing out to you in that area right now?
Yeah, we often spend a lot of time focused on those major common tumor types where there's already been substantial progress. But it's also important to watch out for advances in cancers where patients still have very limited options. That includes pancreatic cancer, sarcomas, and small cell lung cancer, as well as rare tumors more broadly, I guess. In those settings, even incremental progress can matter tremendously for patients. Pancreatic cancer is one of the clearest examples. It remains deeply challenging with persistently poor outcomes. So whenever a new mechanism starts to show a sign of real benefit, the field pays attention very quickly. Resolute 302 with daraxonrasib is especially notable in this regard. Daraxonrasib is a RAS-on inhibitor, and prior reporting suggested significant OS benefit in a tumor type that is considered highly resistant to drug development. So readouts at ASCO will hopefully be impactful because it gives the field a chance to look beyond the top-line data and look a little bit more closely at what it might mean biologically and clinically. Sarcoma is another interesting area to watch, particularly SARC-041 studying Verzenio in dedifferentiated liposarcoma. Sarcomas are rare and heterogeneous, and drug development has often been very difficult here too. So any well-defined targeted strategy draws immediate attention. What makes SARC-041 so interesting is that it's testing CDK4 inhibition in a genomically driven subtype, which reflects a more tailored approach to a disease area that's typically not benefited much from biomarker-based therapies seen in other common tumors. And then there's the broader point that high-need tumor innovation is expanding. SCLC remains a part of that story, including through continued momentum around DLL3 targeted approaches like Imdelltra. Rare tumors, including areas like uveal melanoma, are also increasingly part of the innovation conversation. So for us, the important element is to remember that oncology continues to pursue the use of novel mechanisms in diseases with high unmet need, where innovation is badly needed.
Well, this has been a really great sort of, I think, overview and preview for folks to know what to look forward to this year. But before we wrap up, is there anything else that you're particularly looking forward to or keeping an eye on at the meeting this year?
One topic that's very hard to avoid right now is AI. It feels like it comes up in every conversation, not just in oncology, but across every industry, to the point where even like outside healthcare, you're seeing companies reposition themselves around AI. The funny example to me was that the shoe company Allbirds sold all of their footwear assets and rebranded as Newbird AI, which is such an extreme example. It sounds like I've made it up, but it captures how pervasive AI has become in society and business. However, at ASCO though, I don't think AI is likely to show up in one single headline data set. It's more likely to be a cross-cutting theme running through a whole lot of different presentations and discussions. Probably the right way to think about it as well. The real story is not about AI for its own sake. It's about where it's beginning to move from all that hype into application. One area is biomarkers. We're seeing growing interest in AI-enabled approaches that combine digital pathology, imaging, other multimodal data to identify patient subgroups more precisely, potentially beyond what traditional biomarkers can do alone. Another area also is trial design and execution. Things like enrollment strategy, site selection, cohort definition, and patient matching. These all sound very operational, but they have a real impact on how efficiently therapies get developed and how well the appropriate patients are selected for these trials. So the bigger picture question for AI at ASCO is not whether it'll be mentioned. Of course, it absolutely will be. But its more important question is, where is it delivering meaningful, practical value?
I knew something fell off, and it's that we hadn't brought up AI once in this entire interview, which is maybe the first time of this entire year that's happened. So I'm glad we got that in there. Ben, I appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for joining the podcast. And I wish you a good ASCO 2026.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I think ASCO 2026 has already given us a sense of where the field is heading, even if we don't have the full data sets yet. But we at BGB Group are really looking forward to seeing what ends up driving the biggest conversations on site. So yeah, thank you again.